All righty. Well, hello, everybody. After all that stuff that just happened, I'm Brandon Finnegan, co-founder of Decision Desk HQ. I am joined today by Kirk Beto of National Journal Hotline and Liberty Verdert, professor of data science at Washington University, St. Louis. Of course, if you're tuning in, you know that President Joe Biden has decided to step aside from his campaign. He will not be running for re-election now, leaving an opening for the presumptive nominee, Vice President Kamala Harris. Now, leading up to that decision, it's been made clear through Politico and other sources that his most closest advisors, Joe Biden's closest advisors, had come to him with the latest polling information that they had themselves conducted, which showed a truly ugly map for the president. And on screen right now is that map effectively. You can see that all of the discussed swing states, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Arizona, Nevada, and Georgia, were all going towards Donald Trump. Not only that, but there were openings and cracks in the rest of the great states of blue for the Democratic Party in Minnesota, in Virginia, in New Hampshire, in Maine, in New Mexico, in Colorado. It was death by 1,000 cuts at that point. And they had made it very clear to the president that he simply could not win if he were to continue with his campaign. Thus, the great shakeup that happened on Sunday, where the president made his announcement first on Twitter that he will not be running for re-election. That, of course, then opened up the volley and interest for everyone to focus on his vice president, Kamala Harris. So today we're going to discuss what this all means, what this means for, obviously, the Harris campaign, what this is going to mean nationally for the Democratic Party, and for, of course, Donald Trump, opponent. So, Kirk and Liberty, why don't we go ahead and start off with the basic thing that's already going to start building as a media narrative here, which is, Harris has a background as, of course, Attorney General, before that a DA. So they're going to try to make this the whole prosecuting a case against Trump, so to speak, but in, of course, the arena of elections. How does she go about doing this?
I'll start here. And I think one of the first things that she has an advantage over Biden is she's able to really talk about abortion. If you look back at the kind of the key moments leading up to Biden dropping out, whether it's the press conference at NATO, the debate performance a month ago, the interviews with Lester Holt and George Stephanopoulos, Biden did not mention abortion once. And that is arguably the strongest issue for Democrats right now. Kamala Harris has been on a nationwide tour ever since the Dobbs decision, going out there and campaigning on the issue of expanding abortion access and protecting it in these red states. And Democrats now have a really strong arrow in the quiver with Kamala Harris now, able to take that fight directly to Trump in ways that Biden was either unable to because of his personal beliefs. It's been a long time thing with him where he would just talk about reproductive health of women, not use the term abortion, or because of concerns about his age, about being able to articulate a case against Trump. Kamala Harris is able to do all that and more once she hits the trail here, probably sometime this week.
I got to jump in with this. I think it's easy for, including me, to have short memories. Like, I went back and I looked at some of the presidential debates when Kamala Harris was in them. She got destroyed. I mean, like, truly destroyed on stage. And I don't know whether the Democrats aren't thinking about that. I don't know whether Biden doesn't remember that. I don't know whether we don't remember that. But she's a pretty easy target for a lot of things, given her previous experience. So I think we haven't even seen, she hasn't really been held up to the MAGA spotlight of harsh criticism. And I think we're going to start to see that in the coming days. And I don't know, there's X amount of days until the Democratic convention and it's decided one way or the other. What do you guys think? I mean, just to throw this out there, what do you think? Kamala or the field? Is it done that it's Kamala, that she's going to be the presidential candidate?
I have a feeling that based on the endorsements that have already rolled in, and not to mention the massive amount of fundraising that's been conducted in the last 24 hours, you could say that the Democratic Party has been in stasis for 30 days and effectively made up for that in one day with fundraising. I believe we're at over 200 million between multiple organizations at this point. It's going to be very difficult for another Democrat to challenge her if she's just racking up these endorsements in the first 24 hours. Not to mention, while that's happening, you have this tidal wave of cash that's rolling in. Never say never, of course, and we are weeks from the actual convention. But I would imagine that the Democratic Party, considering the year that they've had already and being down in polling in every single day of polling averages to Donald Trump, is probably more willing to just shift everything over to another candidate and try to move beyond where they've already been. And the prospect of an open convention or real fight probably muddies that down and does not give them the momentum, the reverse momentum, if you will, from what they're trying to gain now between now and the end of August. But of course, I could be wrong, but that's what I would imagine the party that's been in this state is trying to do so quickly.
Well, and Liberty, to your point here, Kamala isn't in the strongest position right now starting off. Yes, she's consolidated the field right now. Any of the serious contenders who probably would have challenged her for the nomination have endorsed her. Even Joe Manchin went through a record-setting Joe Manchin news cycle last night where he teased a potential run against her and then just got booked on all the morning shows today and said, actually, you know what, I'm not going to run against her. I'm just, want us to have a more middle-of-the-road conversation here. Anyone who probably could have seriously challenged her is not jumping in. So I feel like, especially with the endorsement from Nancy Pelosi right before we started recording this, that the shadow primary is done. Now, Democrats are going to have what they're going to call an open primary, an open and transparent primary, according to Jamie Harrison. But I have a really hard time seeing how it's any different. Now, we're probably still waiting to see what Dean Phillips does, the only one who challenged Biden in the first place. But this looks to be a done deal. But if we look right now, if I could, pretty similar to what we're looking at in terms of the Biden matchup right now. She's still trailing Biden. Her favorabilities are actually a little bit below Biden right now. But the bet that Democrats are making is that she has a higher ceiling, that she has more potential to change voters' minds than Biden, who the opinions are all baked in. Both of them have the same basement, a complete wipeout for Democrats. But Kamala has the potential of having a higher ceiling, and that's what they're banking on right now. And if nothing else, it seems to just incite Democrats to have someone not 80 plus years old at the top of the ticket. And you see people voting with their wallets right now, especially to Brandon's point a little bit earlier.
I think that when you, again, the map that we showed at the beginning, when you look at where Biden was, all right, I mean, we were bedrock and drilling through the bedrock at that point. The Democratic Party was absolutely in shambles if he was going to be the nominee. You're talking 40, 50 seats lost in the House, probably 6 or 7 Senate seats lost, not to mention the embarrassment of a 2-to-1 wipeout in the Electoral College, right? And Donald Trump winning the popular vote, which means he would be the second Republican since 1988 to win the popular vote. From that baseline, any alternative is going to look comparatively better. Right. That does not mean that she is like the great hope, that she is the great sage that's going to save everything for them, but she gives them a fighting chance versus what they had, which was no chance with Biden. There was no way that the president of the United States was going to win this election against Donald Trump in the condition he was in the polling that he was showing, and all that stuff feeds itself, right? We saw this with the money. The money surged in on Sunday from Democrats all over the United States, $200 million and rising, right? Everyone was sitting on their wallets for a month because they weren't going to support what was existing. It wasn't supportable. And when you run out of money, more states fall apart. So it would have been just a cascading disaster for the Democrats. That stops that disaster. The open-ended question is, does Kamala Harris have it in her to deliver a campaign that is different from her last presidential campaign in early 2020, the one that she bowed out of before Iowa? Right now, she's been vice president for almost 4 years now. She has been a public figure. The Democrats will reintroduce her. They will use the Democratic National Convention to do that. But this is kind of a thing that we've been in with both political parties all year. Joe Biden was a known quantity. Donald Trump is a known quantity. Kamala Harris isn't an unknown quantity. Like, she's been the VP for almost 4 years, right? It's not like people don't know who she is. This gives the Democrats a limited window to try to buff her up, bring those favorable ratings up, but it also gives an opportunity to the Trump campaign to knock her and nail her straight down, like down towards Biden's level of favorability. And that's going to be interesting to see how this shakes out in the next 5 to 6 weeks. I would advise everyone to not look at every single poll that comes out, because you are going to lose your mind. You're going to see polls that have Donald up. You're going to see polls that have Kamala up. You're going to see polls that make absolutely no sense one way or another as this information kind of percolates across the electorate, and they decide now what they want to do with a different choice from what they had for the past year.
Well, one of those known unknowns that we have is a potential running mate. And I was wondering, Liberty, do you think any of the contenders that are being talked about this week could maybe paper over some of those weaknesses that Harris has that you talked about a little bit earlier at the top of the show.
Well, I don't know, Brandon. Like, can you go back to the map and can we look at this? Because I think, Kirk, that's like a really good point of who the running mate could be. And usually it doesn't matter that much, right? But in her case, it might actually really matter, especially when we look at the electoral map. You know, everyone's been talking about, can she carry Pennsylvania? Can she carry Pennsylvania? Well, I mean, one way to carry Pennsylvania is to pick Shapiro, right? Governor Shapiro is her running mate. And that would go a lot towards getting some really important electoral votes. I mean, there's issues with that. He's Jewish, and obviously a huge base of the Democratic Party has been really anti the war in Gaza. So, you know, where, like, you know, there's pluses and minuses. Same with Bashir. I mean, Kentucky doesn't really bring you anything, but Bashir has a lot to say. So, I mean, is there a candidate, like a VP that you guys think, like, Kirk, do you think there's a VP that comes with all positives and no negatives for her?
I don't think there's one outside of a lab-grown candidate that I think papers over all those issues that she's going to have, especially in the Rust Belt states, the blue wall that we're always talking about, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin. I think Andy Bashir has a lot of upside. I think he's been able to successfully prosecute a case against Republicans as the governor of a red state in Kentucky, while also courting those Republican voters, because you can't win in Kentucky without having Republicans cross the aisle over to you. And I think Roy Cooper, actually, as well in North Carolina, is one to pay attention to. He was on Morning Joe today, really making the case. Another plus side, unlike Shapiro, he's not term limited. He is term limited. He's serving out the final months of his term right now. He adds a level of gravitas and experience, I think, to the ticket that might help Harris. And he's won in purple states before. And Harris has been spending a lot of time down in North Carolina. And if Harris is on the ticket, the calculus might change where Pennsylvania is still going to be key. Don't get me wrong here. But if she can start making inroads in areas that Biden couldn't in North Carolina, maybe keep Georgia in the Democratic column, you know, those swing of Sunbelt states as well. I mean, we could be looking at an entirely different calculus here right now than those must-win Rust Belt states that Biden needed. If he had any path, it was only through those.
I would advise that while it's appealing to see a red state Democrat like Bashir, the idea that that's going to translate enough and flip enough voters in Rust Belt states is going to be a little bit tough. Remember, Bashir won re-election in an off-year cycle. He has a popular family name. He ran a good, solid, moderate campaign for himself. And Bashir would not win a Senate race in Kentucky because a federal race, it's red on the federal level. Right, he can make it a little close, but he's not going to have the magic to do it. However, Bashir probably has the best upside in the fact that replacing him isn't much of a big deal in Kentucky. His lieutenant governor, who's a Democrat, would become governor. They don't lose any ground there. There are downsides in a lot of other states if you try to pull these people away from their existing positions. For example, Mark Kelly. Do you really want to open up a potential race in 2026 in Arizona by removing him from the Senate? Yes, he'll be replaced with a Democrat temporarily, but then that person's going to be up for re-election in a midterm election in 2026.
Martha McSally can just run again and lose. They'll be fine.
Yeah, there you go. I think Bashir probably has the most upside for her. But in terms of being able to make the calculus work, like I don't buy the Cooper reasoning, only because Cooper's also a decent choice for VP. But if you're trying to think that'll flip the state, remember, he ran and won in 2020, and so did Donald Trump. And so did most of the other Republicans running in 2020. You know, Cooper being on the ticket does not translate into the state becoming purple or even blue. It's nice. It gives you at least something. It may try to, you might be able to change the geography a little bit with your VP choice. But I think certain parts of the country are kind of locked in with how it's been for most of the year. If you look at the little bit of polling we have been able to get, and again, I caution people because this is hypothetical polling. This was conducted before Biden dropped out, but she's behind in Pennsylvania in the head-to-heads we've seen. She's behind in Georgia in the head-to-heads we've seen. She's behind in North Carolina, Nevada, Arizona. She's somewhat closer in Wisconsin and Michigan, but that's not enough, right? Again, because Pennsylvania is the ultimate key. So Shapiro probably seems like the most obvious choice for VP if you're trying to lock a state or really flip the momentum in a key state where you could get a lot of benefit. Shapiro has a positive favorability rating in Pennsylvania. But I don't know if the governor wants to leave where he's at. I don't know if he's ready for this yet. I don't know if he has higher ambitions, if he wants to jump to those this quickly, if he wants to serve out at least a full term in Pennsylvania. That kind of comes into being for us to understand. We already know that
Brandon, I mean, I don't know many politicians who are like, no, I'm not ambitious. I don't want to actually go any further. Like, I mean, how many are really going to turn down the VP?
It also depends on if you can see.
I actually do think there's something to that right now. There could be a little bit of a Machiavellian play here right now that, look, you could switch out the top of the ticket with Harris and the result could still be the same. That way it knocks Harris out for 28, and then you kind of have a glide path as a Democrat to run in the ashes of whatever's left of Trump. So there could be some calculation with that there if we're being real cynical about it, but I don't know any politicians who think cynically at all. So that's probably not part of the calculus at all for anyone.
Yeah, I still
like the one thing you have to think about though is like, can you imagine like the secret rooters here? Think about like Nikki Haley, Youngkin. They have to be so excited that Harris might win and Trump's gone, because otherwise they're running against JD Vance in 28. Like they have to be dying for Harris to win secretly, obviously.
Well, I don't quite know if that's true, and here's where I would bring that up. All right, H.W. Bush was not a shoo-in for the presidency in 1988. He was a strong favorite. He was the existing vice president under Reagan, but he was not a shoo-in. He faced an actual challenge. Depending on how well Vance does on this campaign and, you know, what happens in the interim 4 years if the Trump campaign does lose this time around, or I'm completely mixing this up here. If Trump does get elected and Vance, of course, is going to be considered to be next in line. That all depends, of course, on how Trump's 4 years even go. If Trump gets elected and it's an exciting 4 years and it's a great year and the country just loves it, they're just to quote him, they will be tired of winning by this point. Maybe there's nothing they can do about Vance, right? If it's a total disaster, though, that leaves an opening for them as well. So whether he loses or wins doesn't really, I think, play into the 2028 calculus as much, because again, it's 4 years from now. Liberty, do you have any final thoughts before we wrap things up?
I'm just excited to see what happens in the next 9 days. I hope it's as exciting as the last 9 have been. We almost had 2 new presidential candidates. So we'll see what happens. Tuning in here.
Well, when it comes to all things elections, you know where to go. DecisionDeskHQ.com will have everything you're looking for. It'll have all the latest analysis. Of course, it'll have election results in the remaining primaries we have at the statewide level. And of course, if you like and subscribe, you can keep seeing more and more of our videos right here on YouTube. And with all of that, I'm Brandon Finnegan, and thank you for watching.
Thanks, y'all.